This is a new service for partners. The underlying service is actually exposed through ARES Kudo, through the automation capability. But now we want to talk a little bit more about how this works and how partners can best leverage this for their own use case. So before we go into details, a quick video on how this the key parts of this. So the idea is, right, you bring in a bunch of files, but instead of directly editing them as you would on desktop, you can actually run this through the platform, right? And so whether that is the BIM to DWG use case that we are which I would say one of the flagship use cases, or it is just a general import and exporting process, you can fully customize this workflow. So let me show what does that look like in ARES Kudo today, right? You go into the drawing automation panel, you pick one of the pre-configured jobs that we have, you pick the source file. Once you've selected the folder, and this could be in the ARES Kudo drive, could be on any of the other storages that you have available, you pick the source file, and then you click next. You configure where should the output go, right? Again, you can pick any folder. You can configure the job with cheat state you want, whether you want that job to run only once, multiple times, or as a on a trigger. And then you select the output form place. And once you're done, the job gets run. And so what do we offer you today is basically a number of use cases that we think make sense for our ARES Kudo users, right? So one of them is the BIM to DWG use case, but we also allow you to automatically import DGN or PDF. Any of the export features that you know from ARES and ARES Kudo are available. You can also run draw and compare. Think about a daily status update. You just get a diff of what has changed during the day, during the week, and not only for one file, but for all your files, for example, right? We've also added data extraction, as we think that's super important, being able to extract the relevant information. We just saw the case study from Alana's reply, right? Obviously, let's get all the room tags, what has changed in the last week or last month, without actually having to manually open the file and run it yourself. You can get the system to do that for you. And then, of course, very importantly, turn our DWG file into PDF is sort of a very common thing, right? But the key point here is that in ARES Kudo, this is a preset list of automation capabilities, and we'll expand that list, but we don't really give the user that much flexibility because we want to make sure it's a good experience, right? But for partners and larger customers, we're opening up this to be customized, right? And if you try to think about how does it actually work, well, essentially we have at the beginning a script, some kind of action we want to perform on a given file. We have an environment which configures the system in which this script should be running in, and then a configuration that ties that together, plus an input file, right? We bring in a DWG with that configuration, that script, we schedule the job, we run it, and then we are able to access the results, right? Just very high level, let's get an idea of what these scripts could look like, right? It could be for some very simple things like just run this command, right? Draw a rectangle. The other one could be let's run a script, right? Or a LISP file where we script commands in a more sort of structured way. We can add a little bit of logic. We don't have to hard code all the numbers, right? Or you bring in your existing LISP file, right? You can even bring in your native code as well, but then you have to be a little more careful about what version of the runner, what operating system of the runner you're going to select. The nice thing about LISP and the scripts is that they're going to run with any version, any platform. And so here is an example of not only the customizing the script, but the environment, right? In the drawing automation, we create drawings of BIM models, but they're not all going to look the same or should look the same. And by customizing the material mapping, but also the logic of that, you're going to get very different outputs, right? And so you're not stuck with the default configuration that we have in ARES Kudo, but you can go and configure this to your needs, right? You could think about like having a different floor plans for different use cases, right? But how would you go about actually creating those jobs? We kind of give you two ways right now. We have a web UI for manual creation, and then the predominant use case is going to be around on automatic integration. manually. You get this user interface that you get access to once you sign up with us. Here you see an overview of all the jobs you've already run, right? We'll see a job on the page here. It was a BIM to PDF job that was pre-configured. I can download all the files. I can even open this directly in ARES Commander. But if I want to create a new job, I can also on the right-hand side define, run the job template that I've created. I can pick what operating system, what version of the application, anything customization I want to do. And then I pick an input file, say, please run this job against this file, right? And this is really great for kind of testing out new versions of jobs, right? You don't have to go and hook it all up and develop everything. No, you are able to just test this out here directly, look at all the log files, look at all the outputs. But the predominant use case we really see is once you've kind of figured out what that job should look like, you directly take your application, call our REST APIs, define the job with all the different parameters, right, around the environment, the input file. We'll go retrieve that file, then run it in the ARES online drawing automation system, where we basically have a priority queue, right? We have a queue of jobs, depending on what you've signed up for. We'll put that in the queue. We'll have a bunch of runners in the cloud that will actually operate on your files. Once the job is completed, you get access to the result. You can bring that into your own application, or you can actually say, please run this inside ARES because I wanted to continue editing, right? One of the philosophies we have, even with automation, is that you can automate really quite a long way along this process. At some point, you might want to give the user some editing capability, right? And then if you're an OEM partner, obviously you can do directly in your solution based on the ARES tools, or you can, if you're an ARES partner, for example, you can bring that into one of our ARES branded solutions so that the user can continue editing if they choose to do so. And so those are really the key points of around ARES online drawing automation. Martin, do you have some questions before we jump into a case study with Snapshot?
So as a developer can deploy this to their own server as well, if needs be, rather than using Graebert's own servers?
Yeah, so we're exploring different options here. One of the things we are thinking about is also giving developers access to dedicated capacity as well, right? Similar to what we did with the ARES Kudo server, being able to rent dedicated capacity for ARES Kudo server. We already have the capability to designate capacity to a specific partner, right? So they will still join the same queue, but their runners are going to be dedicated, right? So those are one part, but we're also open for customers running or partners running this in their own infrastructure, if that makes more sense. We think the kind of work is going to be somewhat lumpy, right? You're going to say, hey, I want to batch process this folder or whatever. So you're not really going to need the capacity constantly. And so maybe even our SaaS hosted version might make more sense. But we're open for that conversation.
So taking CAFM as an example, is it possible to suck in a model, do something to the model, either in a data extraction or a swap out, perhaps, of some element within the drawing, and then output the drawings per se? So it doesn't have to be this kind of linear load drawings output. You can actually do stuff to the drawings before they get batch produced.
Yeah. So yeah, and these things are also composable, right? So you could actually have one step, which is extracting the data, a second step, transmuting the data, or in a facility management case, modifying it or simplifying the drawings even, because there's certain details you don't want to show up on in the files, right? You have very different needs, right? I spend a lot of my previous time thinking or talking to people where there's always this question like, why doesn't the architecture BIM sort of work well for facility management, right? Because they have very different needs on the data, on the geometry. The precision of the geometry needs to be very different whether you were trying to design a building, construct it, or operate it, right? And so we could do something here, but we really, on the sort of BIM geometry modification, we're really working a lot with our partners for them to work on that part, and we'll just help them create good drawings out of that.
Okay, thank you.